Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Book and Life podcast, where we talk to authors and everybody from all industries to find out what their lives are like after they turn their computers off. Because let's face it, 90% of us write and do stuff on our computers now. So, before we get into a great discussion with the legendary Marsali Taylor and somebody who had a huge influence on my writing, I'm going to stop and give you a quick weekly advert for Marianne Curley's The Time Guardian, Book 4. The battle is over, the war is won, the prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan. Struggling to cope with tragic loss at odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping at shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Lathina's death, Giselle swears revenge and fulfills the Immortals' plan for world domination, but Giselle hadn't planned on love. And that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart or the strings of a goddess? Short on the praise, but high on the expectation. Who continues to pull her from the grave? As the Guard and the Order battle through the past and into the impossible future, darkness lurks around every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe? Who stands in the shadow? Now, let's get on to Everyone Knows Me. I am the author of the Marieswell series. I'm a Shetlander, and it's great because I've got a fellow Shetlander on with me today. Gotta represent the old Shetland Islands. And we're going to be talking about her amazing books that are all set on sailing boats. Yes, you heard me right, sailing boats, and they are crime, and I say they're one of the best crime novels that's come out in Scotland in the last 10 years, okay? But then I might be biased, so you never know. So please welcome to the show, Marsali Taylor.
Thank you.
Well, we have to represent Shetland. I mean, it is where we're from. So we're going to get started with, of course, everyone knows that we play a book game. We talk about an author's life and actually what it's like to be an author. But we're also going to talk about some books. So to begin with, do you want to introduce the readers to your latest crime novel and tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. The most recent book in the Cast series is called A Shetland Winter Mystery, and it's set around Christmas. And those are the dark nights when traditionally the Trows, who are Shetland little people, were given license to come out and roam around the houses. And there was all sorts of traditional things that were done to stop them doing any harm. Like you could take a hair from each of your animals, your pony and your cow and your dog and your cat, weave them together into the shape of a cross and pin them above the byre to keep the Trows out. And you'd go round the house with a lighted peat again to keep them out. So this book starts with the shortest day, and Cass wakes up hearing noises in the night, and she finds that some unexplained small something has left trails of footprints, 4 small somethings all around her house, and disappeared back into a snowy mound just up from the house.
Oh, now that does sound interesting.
And it kind of spirals from there. I had such fun writing it because my grandchildren are away in London, which is an absolutely hopeless place for your daughter to go to and take her grandchildren with her.
Yes, I would agree with that, yes.
Poor kids being London kids. I'm very sorry for them. But at least they get up here and have fun sometimes. But of course in lockdown, I couldn't go down to see them. So this book stars teenagers and slightly younger people. And of course the indomitable Piri Charlie who has to get into everything. So I had an awful lot of fun writing about young people.
And it is fun because, I mean, I've done young adult novels, and I think they are the most fun because here's people that don't really have life experience, and you don't have to worry about giving them life experience. So they're far more easier to have fun with. And I must admit, growing up in Shetland, I had so much fun because I could go anywhere and do anything. And my parents, they let me have a lot of free reign, especially growing up in Lerwick. I could wander around, I could go to youth clubs, I could go sailing, I could go do lots of things, and particularly I grew up fishing with my grandfather, so I was around
Yes.
boats my entire life. I was lucky on that. I kind of dread my own children growing up because they're going to be city slickers, as we would say. Like, they're going to have an entirely different outlook, and then I'm going to take them to Shetland, and they're going to be like, "Hey, Mom, are you living in the dystopian years?" Like, it's gonna be a bit of a culture shock. But luckily, their grandparents are moving down, so we'll be keeping the Shetland traditions alive, at least for that. But I love a good
Oh, yeah.
Shetland story, so I will definitely be buying this new one.
Well, like, my grandchildren came up in the October holidays the last time they were up. This is 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And we live in the centre of Ace, and there's a leisure centre and a shop. But the leisure centre had all sorts of stuff laid on for the local youngsters. And so the first morning I took them down, and Darren, who works there, gave them the full tour of the leisure centre, and their eyes got rounder and rounder. This is nothing like the Ballon one. They've got a climbing wall here. And they just
Yeah.
disappeared down. And then they met the other kids. And
Yep.
suddenly we didn't see them. They'd sort of sweep into the house in a gang of 10 to 12-year-olds. They'd raid the biscuit tin, they'd play sardines under Philip's piano, and they'd sweep out again. And half the time we didn't know where they were.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah.
it's like that in the country. They were in somebody else's house eating somebody else's biscuits and terrifying somebody else's cats. And on the last day, we said to them, "What do you want to do?" And they said, "Free roam, free roam." And they loved it, because in London they can't go anywhere without a personal escort.
Yeah.
And Marnie said to her daughter, "But you get to play with your friends at home." And she said, "Yeah, but that's got to be arranged. It has to be a play date, and we have to know when." And
Yeah.
they just love this idea of just roaming.
I must admit, I
So,
do too. Like, I know that in London, and particularly, the gang culture is so bad. It's just so bad. And kids get drawn into things so easily. And we are lucky with the youth clubs in Shetland because that's their place to go. And when I came back up just in 2020 there, I worked in the youth clubs. And it was great because I really got sort of hook-winged into coming back to the youth clubs when they heard that I was moving home. They were like, "Oh, Crystal's coming home. She's a perfect youth club leader." I was like, "Oh, darn
yes.
it." But it's great because, as a writer, if you're around your subject matter, which at that time I was writing a young adult novel, it's great. You've got plenty of inspiration. But yeah, I feel
Yes.
for the kids nowadays. Like, I've seen it in Glasgow, there's so much more crime with teenagers now than ever before, and they don't have places to go. Like, they're hanging out in front of shops, and they're having coffee and trying to do adult things, but they're bored because they don't know what to do with themselves. And I've seen the underage pregnancy stuff rising here, and it's scary. I mean, here we've had 2 kids with knife attacks in the last 3 years. And I mean, that's in Glasgow, so, that's fairly common here. But yeah, I get why they would love, the islands, the freedom, and everything else. And trust me, when I get to the teenage stage, I probably will be taking them to Shetland, because there's no way that I will handle teenagers running around down here. I think my Shetland paranoia will kick in. Yeah. But luckily, as I said, Granny and Grandad's coming down. So, and this year my dad's actually in Upellia in Larwick. So, I'm hoping to come back for
They
that.
have to come up for that.
I will.
They have to be in the Jarl squad.
It's his first time in the Jarl squad, and people don't realize how much a big deal that is. But they wait like decades.
It's
for
huge.
that. Yeah. But look, and it is a bit sad because my uncle actually died last year, and it's my uncle's spot that my dad's taking to represent my uncle. And my uncle, bless him, he was actually making the suits in lockdown. And he was making, he made junior Jarl squad stuff, and he was doing the galleys and stuff. But it was just a sad case of dementia, and that's something that's very rampant in Shetland at the moment, is the dementia, and the damage it's doing is crazy. It's just, never expected that.
I don't know whether it's more prevalent or whether it's just here everybody.
I think it's
And
because
so
we
you
know
know
everybody.
about it. There's nobody ever able to hide in their flat and not go out except to the corner shop once a week, or you
Yeah.
know, if the old people here, if you don't see them out at the time you expect it, then you raise the alarm bell.
Yeah, and I mean, we always check in on each other up there, which I
Yes,
loved,
yeah.
because
Mm,
my gran was in a what they call assisted living for long enough,
mm,
and she said she had more
mm.
visitors in assisted living than she did when she lived with her husband. So
You
I was like,
probably did.
yeah, and I was like, oh, okay.
Mm,
She didn't like the meals on wheels. She reckoned that they were not very good cooks, but you know, my grandmother was picky. I can't really blame her for that. But that's the thing I love
mhm.
about the islands is we have this community base where we all support
Yes.
each other, you know,
Mm,
and I think that became really important during lockdown. I mean, I don't know how many
mm.
people messaged me every other day and said, you're high risk. How are you doing? And the fact they knew that I
Yeah.
was high risk was incredible. I've been down here on the mainland for a year, and I had to leave my job. I got sepsis, and
Mhm,
I don't think I got a single message from my colleagues the entire time I was in
mhm,
hospital. I was in hospital for 4 weeks straight, and
mhm.
none of the people I worked with messaged me. So it was a bit of a culture shock coming back down and being like, oh, people don't really care down here. I don't really like this. But yeah, I'm missing the islands, but sadly the medical situation means I can't be there, but I can visit, and I do visit. So
And you can read my books,
I
which I
do
hope
read your books. When I
you're
feel
what it's
really
like to live
lonely,
here.
I read your books. And the worst thing is my birthday is usually an Uppelia, so
Uh-huh.
I make it an Uppelia kind of night where I sit with my Shetland books, Shetland music
Oh, good.
playing.
Yeah.
I get some mulled wine made, and I indulge in my history, and my partner, my husband now, looks at me like I'm nuts. So
Mm-hmm.
God only knows what he's going to be like when we're up there and we're walking and we're watching the Earl Scott March and stuff. I think he'll think that
Oh,
we've all
he'll
lost
get
our
caught
minds.
up in the excitement. It's so spectacular.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't help but get excited.
I think he's going to tell them
Make
that their
sure he's
swords
got
are
lots of
really.
warm clothing on.
Yeah. My partner's a sword and knife enthusiast, and I honestly think he's going to be telling them, "Oh, you should have sharpened it here, and it would have worked better if you did this." I think they'll get critiqued, and I think my dad's
Mm.
actually more worried about that than he is actually about marching. So yeah, but let's get into books, which
Mm.
if you're a writer, you have to read every day. It's part of
Yes.
our discipline, it's part of our routine. So I'm going to start off with a
Mm.
hard question. What is the book that you've recently read that stuck with you the most? The one that you just, no matter what you do during the day, you can't shake it. You're always thinking about it.
Mm. Well, there were several of it. I was thinking our readers group book, which was yesterday,
Yeah.
was Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro, which was an
Ooh.
absolutely wonderful read about a loving, kind robot who is an artificial friend to a young girl. Super book, very sad, and we had a wonderful discussion about how far artificial intelligence can go.
And how
I've
scary it is.
recently been discovering the author Rumer Godden,
Oh,
who
right.
was I read her as a child things like The Mouse and His Child and Miss Flower and Miss Happiness,
Yeah.
and I've been discovering her adult books, and I particularly loved one called In the House of Breed, set in a convent,
Oh,
about
wow.
somebody who almost retiring age who retired to a convent. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
that went on in
two,
London, didn't it? Kind of near the end of sort of the World
mm,
Wars and stuff like that. The older people that weren't married were going into the convents, and some of them were becoming midwives and were placed all over the place.
mhm, yeah.
That's incredible.
I don't think it was it was just a decision that this woman had made, and it kind of followed her through it.
Yeah.
But the other two that I feel non-fiction ones that really influenced me have been Caroline Perez's Invisible Women, which is an
Oh, I like that one.
absolutely fascinating read. Have you read it?
I've read
Yeah.
bits of it online, but I haven't actually had a chance to pick it up. But I do
Yeah.
want to. I also
Yes.
like how the
Do.
fact that
Do.
Yeah, our whole world's changing in regards to women, and I was
I
talking
do
about this
hope so.
last week. You know, it's
Mm,
crazy. Um, One of the things that I studied when I left the Shetlands was I did wrestling. I trained to be a wrestling writer, so writing
mm-hmm,
wrestling shows, and that is a
mm-hmm.
very male-dominated world, like
Oh,
incredibly
yes.
male-dominated world. And
Mm.
I got told right from the bat, "Hey, you're a woman. You can't write wrestling." And I went, "You obviously haven't met a Shetland woman, because if you say you can't, they can't do something, we're gonna go do it. You know, because
Yeah.
that's how we're bred. That's how we're born." And
Mm.
I did.
And
I wrote
wrestling
several.
sheep
Yeah,
wrestling sheep is an important job of a Shetland woman if you're in the
exactly. You know,
country.
like we understand it. I mean, we probably
Yeah.
wrestle better than
Oh,
they do.
yes.
You know, but so yeah, I went on and I did it, and I still
Mm-hmm.
get flack to this day for being a woman
Mm-hmm.
who wrote a couple of wrestling shows. But it trained me, because being an author, you can't have a thin skin. There's
Mm-hmm.
always critics out there that will tear your book apart, and I must admit it was the best possible training I could have had. But I'm somebody that believes in, hey, us women, we can break any glass ceiling we want. And I kind of promote that. And I did actually last week with Joe. I was very kind of like, hey, why is wrestling kind of locking us women out here? And this is a great platform for being able to kind of raise those things that, you know, a lot of other podcasters don't want to do it because they're scared. You know, they're scared of not getting guests, or scared of, you know, the backlash and stuff. And I'm not, because at the end of the day, if you're not talking about this, how is anything going to change? So I love
Well,
books
yeah.
that are about that, and about pushing forward for all of us.
Well, I do recommend this one. I didn't, you know, I've always felt that the world doesn't quite fit me, and suddenly I realised why. It literally doesn't fit because it's not designed for me.
No,
Things
exactly.
like, you know, we're 50% more likely to be injured in a car accident because cars are designed for males of sort of
A
certain
certain height,
average
yeah.
male height, average male weight. And we pesky women will insist on pulling the seat forward because otherwise our feet can't reach the pedals.
Exactly,
And
yes.
so we're in the wrong place for airbags and safety and so on. So that was
Yeah.
fascinating. And the other one was Sherry Turkle's Alone Together. She's an
Ooh.
American academic who studies robotics, technology, influence of technology on human interaction. And it's an absolutely fascinating book which
I
taught me
will
all
have to
sorts
check
of
that one
chilling
out,
things
yeah.
like these days, apparently old people in some care homes are being given a kind of animatronics seal to keep them happy,
That
or
is
an
weird.
animatronics baby. Rather than real
Wow.
people going and talking to them, they're being given these mechanical objects that they can pretend are real,
That
which
is
is an
scary
awful
to think.
indictment of our society.
No, I mean, that's scary to think. I mean, I know we're not
Mm,
doing it in Jetland, but that's scary. Because that thing could
yeah.
be saying anything to anyone. I mean, it's like, if you look at the rate of people who have their nursery cams hacked, you know,
Mm,
one of those things could get hacked, and then you don't know what that person's being told. And especially somebody as vulnerable as that, no, I mean, that's beyond crazy.
mm,
But I know that, like, technology's overtaken all of our lives, especially with COVID, because this is the only way we could communicate with people, was through remote
mm.
access. I mean, half of the interviews that's been done by podcasters and radio shows and everything else has been done via remote. Heck, I think I did more job interviews on remote than I did in person. And then when I had to do one in person, I was like, oh, this is weird. I don't know how to do this anymore. And it's
I
like going
think
back to
that's why
the
it's been
doctors
about
too.
COVID that we've got out of the way of doing it. And this is why I'm so keen to get back to normal as soon as possible, you
Yeah.
know, have our readers group meeting in person again. Because otherwise, I think we're going to start preferring not doing it because it is easier
Yeah,
in some
exactly.
ways.
I
You
mean,
know,
I
it's
loved writing in
less effort
cafes.
physically, but it's also, I don't know, I think it worries me that people are getting more and more used to speaking to each other through screens and not going out and talking to people. So I'm
Exactly.
trying hard to make more of an effort to go and talk to people now we're allowed to.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I was one of the high risk patients, so I spent more time working with kids on computers, and I thought, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
the screen time they're getting, because I mean, they're doing
Mm-hmm.
school, and then at night their parents are letting them play games with us. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
insane. And I said to Ian, I'm like, even now, I'm on restrictions. Like, they keep an eye on me all the time. If you get sepsis once, they treat you like you're going to get sick every day, kind of thing. And it's pretty insane. And I mean, in hospital, it was like everybody wanted to do FaceTiming. And luckily, I couldn't talk, so I got out of it. I got out of it so much. I was like, woo! But yeah, I mean, it's so scary to me that every author now is saying they don't do face to face with their publishers. They don't do face to face with their agents. You know, half of them have never even met their agents or their publishers in person. That to me is just so scary. I mean, if
Well,
I'm doing a book tour, I want to be in person.
I've not met my new publisher yet. I've spoken to him loads on the phone, but that's 3 years worth of books, and
Yeah,
I've just
exactly.
not been able to get down to London. And he's sort of out of London a bit, and he's only in the office certain days, and that never seems to work with the days that I was going to be in. But I'm hoping to meet him sometime soon. And my agent, I haven't managed to have lunch with her for again 2 years because that's how long it's been.
It is
But
crazy, isn't
hopefully
it?
that will come again.
Yeah, and I mean,
It will.
for me, I don't get that opportunity because all my publishers are Americans. So, you know, if I do get to see them, I mean, luckily one of the publishers I'm in talks with now, she's coming over in June for the Irish retreat. And I'm like, stop in Glasgow and I'll buy you lunch, you know, and that way we get to
Yeah.
meet. But I mean, it's crazy for me. I mean, I game, I do the podcasts now, and I write, so I feel like I'm never detached from this computer. And if I
Yeah.
do, I'm cross-stitching, and by the way, that is like the weirdest response I get when I'm in a hospital, is people walk up to me and say, what are you doing? What is that you're doing? They don't realize that I'm embroidering. So I have to
Ah.
explain it. I
Yeah.
must have explained it like 30 times in the last year to people. It's crazy. And I mean, and when I say I'm from Shetland and knitting and sewing and everything else is just part of our everyday lives, they think we're crazy, you know, because they're like, well, why don't you just go to the shop and buy it? Because it kind of means
Oh,
more if
it's
you
not
make it
fun at
yourself.
all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Luckily my mother-in-law just bought me a sewing machine, which I am
Mhm.
so grateful for because I mean, you know what it's like to hand stitch anything. It takes a long time. So the fact that she was like, here's a mini sewing machine. And I was like, oh great, I can finally finish these quilts that are sitting here, you know, in a pile. But that's
Well,
just Shetland life,
I'm
isn't it?
making, I make costumes.
Yeah.
I'm a key member of our amateur drama group. So 18th century I like particularly. So I have several full 18th century outfits with hoops and stays to go underneath. And I have a wonderful old 1906 treadle, which I bought while I was a student at university.
Yeah.
And it's still going strong. In fact, recently I discovered somebody who serviced old sewing machines. So he came out and
Oh
spent a
wow.
morning with it. And it was wonderful. It's now sewing beautifully.
Oh, that's
He actually
amazing.
said that somebody at some point had taken it apart and put it back together wrongly, and it was still sewing.
Wow.
But now it's really doing well. So I'm going to make myself a really pretty dress for my niece's wedding in September.
See, that's the thing about us. I always say that Shetlanders are crafty, but we have like the longest winters. And I don't think people have realized just how long our winters are. I mean, it's getting light here in Stirling now, but I know back home it's still really dark early, you know, and it's,
No, it's we've crossed the equinox, so
oh, we
now
have,
it was
yeah.
light this morning. I can say definitively it was light this morning at 4:45 because I happened to be awake, and it's not getting dark until about 8 o'clock. So we're
That's
now getting
good.
longer light than we are
Yeah.
down south.
I mean, yeah, and it's good to see that
Actually,
it's
I
already
find the
started.
dark days hopeless for sewing because my eyes are aging and the light's not good enough.
Yeah, I mean,
But dark
I've had
dark
that
days
too.
are my writing time. I aim to start a book in September, and I'm just doing the finishing touches. I'm determined to get it to my agent for Easter, and
Exactly.
then yeah. So that's a good writing time. You know, you stay in. It's cold and nasty outside.
Yeah,
But having
exactly.
said that, you know, we get lovely winter days, and I get my morning walk round the village most days.
Yeah,
And if it's nice, you know, I can take the boat for a run because that's good for our engine.
exactly. And
They, they
that's
take
the
the
thing.
mask off me.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people
Mm.
don't realize is when you're in an islands community, boats are like your lifeline. I mean,
Yes.
I stayed in Yale for a number of years as a child, and I used to ride horses, down at the local hall for like the market on a Saturday morning. That doesn't happen
Hmm.
anymore, but I used to do it. Like my gran had this stubborn old Shetland pony that was god awful, and she would say, "Right, ride down to market and get me stuff." And I was like, "Oh no," because this thing would just, oh, he would just stop for no reason at all, and he was like a
Hmm.
mule. He just would not budge. I could have set off an explosion behind him, and he wouldn't have moved. But like that's the thing. Like I was on boats probably before I could walk, because my grandfather, unfortunately, had a reputation for smuggling, but which I didn't
Probably
find out
well.
till he passed on, by the way. So it was interesting. And he fished all the time. Fresh mackerel was always in our house. He always had trout. That man could find trout
Mm.
like I don't know how he did that, but back at Brassey, and he had fish. And we
Hmm.
were really lucky in that regard. And the other thing is, like, down here, if you were to buy a whole cow, people would think you're nuts. But I think people
Hmm.
in Shetland do that more than anybody. We all have, like, I call them half coffin because that's the size they are, but deep freezes. You come down here, and there's no space for a deep freeze anywhere. I mean, especially in the flat that I live in, it's so tiny. And I
Hmm.
always say to my husband, we got to make the shopping last for the entire month. And he looks at me like, but the shop's right down the road. It's crazy. Like, I still haven't
Hmm.
let go of the Shetland ways. I don't think I ever will. I'll be one of those moms that'll be teaching them, hey, keep your deep freezer full, because you never know when you're
Yes.
gonna need it. Um,
Yes.
we freeze
And also
everything.
the meat is so wonderful. If you can buy local meat, like we
Yeah,
bought a quarter cow, and it's the best beef I've ever tasted. It
yeah,
was a
exactly.
grass fed animal that had lived outside, and the same with the lambs. They come straight from the hills, so we get 3 of those every year, and that's Sunday roasts for the rest of the year.
Exactly, and I mean it's crazy because when you look at the food that you get out of the supermarket, sometimes it's not the best. I mean, we've had orders in from Asda because we had to order in from Asda because I wasn't allowed in the shops, and I mean I was having stuff that was going off the next day, and I was
Hmm.
thinking, this is crazy. Like, why is this the case? And I used to just get it and put it straight in the deep freeze so I could keep it. And I miss it. I miss having being able to phone Auntie Annette Shewan and say, hey, you got any sheep going, or is there any cows going? And
Mm.
it's not for any other reason that we need that kind of meat and that fuel to keep us warm in the winter, because it's cold in Shetland during the winter. I mean, I've never had a warm winter in Shetland in my life. And I was there in, do you remember 1995, the snow?
Hmm. It was
That was
so pretty.
insane. Yeah, it was
It
so
was like the
pretty.
stage set for the Snow Queen. It was so white and sparkling, and it sort of got blown into shapes. I remember it was high enough that I could step over the school gate instead of having to open it.
Yeah,
And in the corner by the swimming pool, where there was obviously a wee sort of whirlwind effect, there was this beautiful snow wave, proper wave, sort of curled over at the top. It was absolutely gorgeous.
yeah, and
I had fun with that in the new book because we had a really snowy winter 2 years ago as well when I
yeah,
was writing it, and so it's very snowy,
yeah,
lots of snow.
and that's the thing, like, because we're so far north, we get
Mm.
the worst of the weather. I mean, this year's probably been what the windiest winter for Shetland.
Well, Nah, don't know about that either. And I'm not actually sure about the worst of the winters because I used to go down to my mum's in Edinburgh and absolutely freeze down there. There was this
Very true.
nasty biting east wind that you got the whole time. It's warmer in Glasgow maybe.
Yeah, it
And
is. Yeah.
and she would look at the weather forecast for us and say, "You're warmer." We'd be a lot cooler in summer, but
Yeah.
we'd be a couple of degrees warmer in winter. But then you've got wind chill.
Yeah.
But
People
it's
forget
just
that part. Yeah.
no, no. I wouldn't want to live in the city again.
No, I mean, I was laughing with my dad the other day because he was getting weather warnings for Corf because he
Hmm.
stays in Corf, and he was getting the wind was so bad inside his house, his windows were moving inwards, and they were coming in
Hmm.
about an inch, and he honestly thought they were going to break. And
Hmm.
here I am, I'm in Stirling, and Stirling is terrible for wind. It really is terrible for wind. I thought Shetland was
Hmm.
bad till I moved here, and then I'm like, oh, okay. Because the Stirling Road, there's no protection on it. So if you've got like
Hmm.
40 to 50 mile an hour winds coming through there,
Hmm.
good luck in the car. I mean, I don't know how the buses do it. And my hubby's a bus
Hmm.
driver, and I worried every single day that he was driving that bus thinking, please, Lord,
Hmm.
don't let him get blown over today. Like, I mean, it was so crazy. And I thought, when I'm seeing the winds up in Shetland and they're a lot higher than what we had,
Hmm.
I was like, I hope my dad's keeping everything tied down because,
He is. He
yeah,
naturally is. This is another thing that really surprises me when I go south. You see, like, scaffolding with a wheelbarrow left on it.
yeah.
Whereas in
Like,
Shetland, that definitely wouldn't be left there.
no, because
You
we
you
know it gets blown
evacuate
off,
everything. Yeah, you just don't leave things lying around in the same way.
I laugh because my neighbors last year, they got this Pawnee Tunnel, above ground Pawnee Tunnel, and
Mm.
they are wind traps. If a wind gets through it and can pick it up, they are wind traps. And they lost it. It came flying through our driveway, hit our car and two
Oh.
others. And this poor
Hmm.
woman was running after it because they didn't tie it down. Like, we had to tie down their bins because they had no idea that you're supposed to tie bins down in high winds. And I thought, if we don't tie them down, we're going to have a bin in our front room or something. And,
Yeah.
and it's crazy here. The other thing that I've
Mm.
noticed is people are all complaining about stoves, wood burning stoves and wood burning fires now. This is a thing. And I'm sorry, I grew up with that. I prefer that to the central heating by far.
Yes.
And it's cheaper
It
too.
stays warm for longer.
I do not believe for a second that Shetland is burning more fuel than they are down here in the power plants. I just
I'm
don't
sure
think
we're
it's
not.
possible. And, there's so many of these houses that are having these fireplaces ripped out of them with these specialized stoves to keep it warm. I would rather have a house with a wood burning fire, particularly now that they've lifted. I mean, I don't know if it's hitting you yet, but here they only lift our rubbish once a month. So every
Mm.
one of those 4 recycling bins, we get lifted once a month. And I'm not joking. It's not enough down here for the people in the city.
Mm.
It's awful. And we're lucky. We're on the countryside, so it's not, we're not too overloaded in where we stay. But even we struggle with it. I mean, I've seen my hubby have to do, dump runs because
Mm.
they just don't lift it enough. But if you've got a wood burning stove, you can use that cardboard as kindling.
Mm.
Then it's great because you can burn it and you can burn your letters and it reduces the waste so much. And guess what, guys? If they're taking it to recycling, do you not think that they're burning that stuff as fuel so that they can do the other stuff? Because they are. It just it would be cheaper and faster if we're heating our homes with it. Then that's a
In
terrible
Lerwick, they
thing. I
do
think.
actually heat homes with it. In Lerwick, they have the district heating system, which is actually incinerating rubbish and using that to create heat,
Yeah, exactly.
which is a brilliant idea.
I always feel like
Far better.
Shetland's ahead of heating and certain things. Like we're really good at inventing stuff, and we're really good at looking at things and saying, okay, we can do this better, and this is how we're going to do it better. And I'm not blowing Shetland's horn, okay? I really haven't. But growing up there,
Well, I'll
like
blow
I
our
have,
trumpet for that one.
yeah, but I have
There's
a lot of respect for it because we do think outside the box, but we have to think outside the box because, no offense, it's a 13-hour boat ride to Aberdeen, and the flights, you're lucky if you can get a flight out nowadays. It's just I think if we're not smart, don't live on an island. If you can't handle a little bit of rough weather, don't go to the islands. But and Shetland's getting more popular
importantly,
now.
if you can't do your own plumbing, deal with your own. There's all sorts of little things. If your stove suddenly innards fall apart, you can't just call somebody to come and deal with it. You have to get the fire bricks and the fire clay, and then you need to be handy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, my hubby went up to Shetland, and my mum's terrible. She doesn't do DIY. She had no idea about DIY. And my hubby he was a former shop fitter, so he's done houses and you name it, he's fixed it. And he fixed my grand flat up in the Burr Road before we sold it. And he went around and he fixed my mom's house. Like, there was not a day he was not drilling, mending something. I mean, he literally kept the water out the window when the window seal broke, and we couldn't get a window seal. Like, he went to the hardware store, you could not get one, and he came up with an entire plan to fix it till we could get somebody in to actually, with the right materials. It was more the materials that was the issue. And luckily for my dad, he actually has a whole workshop underneath his house. It came with the house. He had no idea it was there till my hubby was like, you do realize you've got, like, something to cut wood, and you've got insulation here, and you've got... I mean, he had enough material under his house to rebuild another house. He had no idea. So it was good for my dad because he got an education. He's in lockdown with me because for a while they were locking families in with high-risk patients. My dad went nuts. He's not a man to sit around and do nothing. And it was so crazy because my dad got told how to do DIY because Ian just took him and was like, let's do it. Ian could fix motorcycles. That was his other trick. And he fixed my dad's. He actually gave it a full service. And I don't think my dad had ever done a full service on it. We found a tree growing out of his air filter. An actual tree was in his air filter growing. And if anyone knows anything about Shetland, trees struggle in Shetland because of the wind. And this little guy had gotten into my dad's air filter system, and it was doing really well, considering there was no soil or anything in there, and it was going for it. So Ian had a hard time getting it out, but he got it out. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and you'll see with Marzi's books, it's just, the way that we think is so different. Your writing is so refreshing because it's so difficult to tell what's coming with your writing, whereas I can read other people's novels and be like, oh, I know what's coming. And I don't know if that's because I've got a writer's brain and I can see, like, all the tricks, or if it's just a case of some people's stuff is kind of predictable because it's already been on television or it's already been done before. And I think with Shetland, because we've grown up in that environment of telling stories around the fireplace on a really bad night, and you used to always get stories when you were a kid getting tucked in at night. Your mom and dad didn't always have books to read to you, so they would make up stories. So storytelling's kind of in your blood in Shetland. And I think Marzi's probably one of the best examples to come out of Shetland. I mean, I've done a breakthrough genre, and she's leading the way with crime. And I would buy her book over 90% of the crime writers out there, and 90% of the writers out there. Just simply because it's realistic, and it's easy to believe, and it's easy to fall in love with those characters. And even my hubby, he's terrible, because I can't watch a crime show with him. Because 2 minutes in, he'll tell me who the murderer is. And I'll be like, really? Come on. And sometimes I'll argue with him and say, no, it's not, And then at the end of the show, it is, and I'm like, damn it, I just lost a pound because I stupidly bet against him. But with yours, he couldn't tell. He had no idea. And it was great because he was so caught up in the sailing that he couldn't figure it out. And I must admit, it was a relief. It was an absolute relief to be able to give him a book and him not to go, oh, I already know who's the murderer, and him to quit the book. He did that with Anne Clee's book. He picked it up, knew who the murderer was just off the blurb at the back.
Oh.
I was like,
That's badly written blurb, though, I think.
yeah, it was a
You
badly written
shouldn't be
blurb.
able
And
to do
I
that.
looked at my husband and I said, no, you got to be wrong. They don't tell you who the murderer is in the blurb. I read it and I was like, oh, shoot. Crap. Okay, he was right. You know? But he loves the series. He loves the Shetland series. I'm not a fan of the Shetland series. I think it portrays us in a really bad light. And I hate how dark and dull it makes the islands look. Have you seen it?
I've seen a couple of them. We don't actually have a TV that's plugged in. We have one that we use for watching videos, but we don't do live TV. We stream films and watch those.
Yeah.
But my daughter she was in the first one as the bridesmaid in a red dress with too much red lipstick who had had an affair with the groom.
Yes.
And then
yes,
she came back again as the girlfriend of the younger policeman,
Yes.
Sandy.
Sandy.
So I think she was in maybe three of them, and we saw those ones, and I enjoyed it. And it's difficult to judge when you're living here, because of course we're having fun going, hang on, she got off a bus to Tinwell and then 5 minutes later she'd walked to Eshiness. How did she manage that?
And trust me, guys, that's really impossible. I know our islands are small, but you can't do that. I literally said to Ian, I don't know how many times, that doesn't happen. you know, and he banned me from watching it with him.
Don't know that. Folk who've seen a woman standing on the edge of the cliffs at Fair Isle and then jumping off cliffs somewhere completely different. You know,
right?
Other people don't know that.
And
yeah, the one that was set on Fair Isle, she committed suicide from. But ended up at Eshiness again, because Eshiness is the cliffs that everybody films, the black ones.
Yeah, because they're so pretty.
I think we tend to look at it with a different eye.
I think we're judgmental too.
Well, one of the things I've enjoyed doing in my books is trying to show how beautiful it all is up here, because I think the series goes for this gloomy noir look, whereas actually in summer it is gorgeous. It's absolutely, in winter it can be absolutely beautiful, but the minute the sun comes out, then the sky is filled with light, and that's all reflected off the sea, and there is sea everywhere. And you know, you've got the hills are just all this soft green colour, or the heather ones darker, but and every burn is bright yellow with marsh marigolds down the side. It is gobsmackingly gorgeous.
And that's the thing, like I took my husband up, and he had never seen, like, we were in Quark and the sun never set for a few days, right? And I think every Shetlander knows what I'm talking about when I say this. And he got up to go to the bathroom, and I think it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and he came in and he woke me up and he goes, Crystal, the sun's still up. And I'm like, no, it's just light outside. And he's like, no. And he was so taken away by it, he took photos and he sent it to his sister, forgetting the time, obviously, that it was being taken. But, you know, and they couldn't believe how pretty it was. And they live, you know, in Glasgow, so they go up to Loch Ness, they go up to Loch Lomond and Callander, and these places are stunning too. But I don't think they have the same beauty as Shetland. And I must admit, I miss hearing the ocean every day. And I keep saying to my husband, I mean, that's why we lived, our longest period that we've ever lived in one place was actually in Helensburgh, because you could hear the water. And you did get the winds like you do in Shetland, and it felt like home. The people felt like Shetlanders. So I both miss the island, but I also miss Helensburgh quite a bit for that reason. And the great thing was I was hugely into the community when I was in Helensburgh. I went to the church. Everyone in the church knew me. I was the girl that made tea. Everyone else would come in and sit down.
That's the way to make yourself known at church.
Yeah, exactly. Like I would make tea for the choir. So the choir all knew me, and when I stopped going, they were like, "Wait, where's our tea lady?" you know, and I was greatly missed. In fact, when I got married, it was my pastor from Helensburgh that married us, and it was a funny wedding. My wedding was not what you would expect at all, because you know we've got Glasgow humour and then we've got Shetland humour. So the jokes were flying all night long, and everyone was having a whale of a time. And I'm not a big dancer anymore because of my arthritis, so I didn't have a dance. I didn't do the dancing. But I had a big puffy dress, I had a husband who tried to help me sit down and then realized I couldn't sit down in my skirt because it was way too big. The hoop literally would have turned me upside down. You know the way it goes. And I'd done drama in Shetland, and I thought I could sit in any dress. I could do anything in any dress. I soon learned that there's a certain trick to big dresses that I didn't know. So I nearly ended up on my butt a few times, but I learned. I should have walked around the house in it. I really should have learned, done that. But my house was so small, I wouldn't have got it through the hallway. So I kind of learned, okay. But no, I must admit, I will have a home fairn at some point, because a lot of my Shetland family were not able to attend. And it was sad, because I missed everybody. And we still had COVID restrictions, so a lot of my family couldn't come. And also, my wedding ended up being, unfortunately, at prelim time. So my niece and my cousins couldn't come because they were sitting their prelim exams. That was just bad timing. I mean, my wedding got rearranged 8 times because of COVID. Luckily I had a venue that was very understanding, in Dumfries and Galloway, so I was lucky on that account. But yeah, I must admit, it was nice to see the Glasgow Shetland connection working. And there was no animosity on any side. There was no kind of awkwardness. My family had not spent a lot of time with my in-laws, because obviously if you're living in Shetland, you don't get down very often. But it actually worked out pretty well. We were actually pleasantly surprised. My aunt loved it. She'd never met any of them before. And it was fantastic. And that's the thing about Shetland. We're so welcoming. We are so friendly. We do get a glove easily. I'll admit that. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat at times. But yeah, it was great. And my husband, he was scared of going up there because on our first date in Shetland, we got locked in a cafe because they didn't understand what he was saying. And they weren't sure if he was going to rob them. I remember the lass asking me if he was going to rob them. And I was like, no, he's only in for a roll and sausage. But I had to say sassenich because she didn't know what a sausage was. And it was so funny because after that, he was always wary of Shetland because he wasn't sure how people were going to accept him or interact with him. But they got over their concern of his accent, and he gets on great with them now. So every time my dad goes to the roll van, the first thing he's asked is, is your son-in-law coming up? And my dad's like, no. Oh, so okay. So yes, with our next question is there an author, past and present, who's influenced and inspired you and got you excited about books? And do they still get you excited about books?
Well, I've always been excited about books. Even as a child, my mum used to say I devoured books rather than read them. I loved reading. I loved the Narnia books, Anne of Green Gables. Have you come across the author Eleanor Lyon?
I've seen her stuff online, but I've never checked it out.
The Ian and Sofa series, set in the west coast of Shetland. I really loved those because that was where we spent magical childhood summers. As soon as my dad got his school holidays, because they were slightly different from ours, then we all piled into the dormobile, or sometime later on we got the train with Mum and Dad, went ahead to open up the cottage. But we spent the entire summer in this little cottage, 3 miles by boat from the head of the road, looking right straight out onto one of the Highlands' most gorgeous lochs. And we spent the whole summer there. So those books reminded me of that. I discovered Georgette Hare as a teenager, and she is still my go-to if I feel tired or down or not very well. I have to limit myself because I'm almost at the stage where I could recite them.
Yeah, I think we all get like that.
Jane Austen, Val McDermid's Kate Brannigan is another one when I'm feeling I need cheered up. I love that series.
She's an incredible writer, I must admit, and she's doing so much good stuff, like that whole thing she did with the news and fighting, that whole situation with the football club. She's a writer that I'd love to get on here because I think she really understands a lot of the big problems that we have today, and she's so clued in, and even her writing is really
Yeah.
clued in. That's particularly what I love about her. And I mean, you're talking about summers, where you went to the island. I mean, I spent my summers in Cullyville, Yell, and that's remote. I don't think people realize Yell's quite a remote place sometimes. And I spent time in Unts too. I spent quite a bit of time in Unts with the camper van. My dad got a camper van, and that was us. We were staying on all the islands that we could get the camper van onto. I never made it to Papa Stewart. I would have loved to have made it to Papa Stewart, but I never made it there.
Oh, Papa Stewart is lovely. We have monthly retreats there with the church. We
Yeah,
just
I would have
all
loved to have
pile
done
on the
that.
ferry on a Wednesday morning and stay there all day and have mass in the kirk, and it's such nice. It's so quiet.
Yeah,
It's absolutely silent because there's very little traffic on the islands.
yeah,
People have an old car that they use, but most people just walk everywhere. Well, all 8 people who live there during the week. But it's, Ace, where I stay, it's a village of 350 people, but it's noisy. There's clanking down at the Salmon Pier,
yeah.
and there's the school football pitch, which appears to need mowed every 10 minutes.
Yes,
And,
I noticed that.
and there's cars going past, and it's something I really noticed in lockdown. I never ever thought of Ace as being polluted,
Yeah,
and yet suddenly the air was so much clearer. I
yes,
couldn't
exactly.
believe that actually that made a difference. So it's lovely going on to Papa because it's just so quiet.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Like, my family all came from Sanis, on my dad's side. And we would go to Sanis, and he would show me where my nan had the post office, and she lived there, and how they used to walk to school, and all the different stuff that you
You're
wouldn't.
Jameson then?
Yeah,
Are you a Jameson?
she
Yeah,
she
taught
did lots
several
of
of
stuff,
them.
and her family is part of the Jameson Wool Factory, for instance. So the connections there was so strong. So Dad used to take us down there, and we would spend days just in Sanis. And so many people would come to him and say, "Oh, you're Violet Bain's son," and "Oh, this this is her granddaughter," and that meant so much to me. I preferred those holidays as a teenager to being stuck on the mainland where it is polluted. I mean, I hated going to Aberdeen because it was so noisy. And I got so used to the quiet in Shetland that I just never realised. And then when we were staying in Corf, the traffic in Corf got worse in lockdown, but it didn't get better because everyone was going for runs. We're on lockdown, but we're going to get in the car and drive around. And I'm thinking that's kind of going against the advice, not with the advice. But I never realized just how busy that road in and out of Corf is and the speeding too. Oh my God, the speeding. My mum and dad went for a walk, and my mom nearly got mowed down by somebody because they were just taking a corner too fast, Would you not agree that some of the accidents this year in Shetland's been a lot worse, kind of particularly at the Black Gate and things like that?
It seems to take turns, doesn't it? You have no accidents for a bit, and then you have a really bad one.
Yeah.
But the worst, I think, are the ones where you lose 4 teenagers at a go because the driver has had a bit to drink or is just going too fast.
And there's
And
a lot
I
of
think
this
that is,
sort of dangerous driving that they're doing where they're overtaking trucks. I mean, we were up there and this guy overtook a truck and nearly hit a person on a pedal bike. And I thought, why? You're not going to get very far. I mean, what's the point in this? And myself, I lost a classmate in a head-on collision just after we graduated. I mean, he mustn't have been out of school a year, and he was taken, and so was the guy that was next to him. I mean, it was pretty bad, and I thought, this is really sad, and there's been quite a few of my classmates that have passed on now, and I think I was surprised because I honestly, in my mind, in my way of thinking, and I know this is a very weird way of thinking, but when I was sick, everybody that was sick was always in Aberdeen, and everybody was healthy in Shetland. Like, very few people got sick in Shetland as far as I was aware. So this past few years, having my friends that I went to school with passing away, it's just been crazy for me, and it's such a reality check for me. But these are things that happen, I think, more now, and I just kind of blown away by it. So, what genre do you feel you're more drawn to? If you were in a bookstore or you were shopping online, because we've all had to do shopping online lately. What's the first genre that you check out when you're in the store?
Now, this for me was a really hard one to ask because actually I very rarely visit bookshops. I go occasionally into the Shetland Times bookshop, but that's in Lerwick, and I don't do Lerwick unless I have to. So I'm only there when I'm in doing an event or, calling in to say hello or something like that, or buying a particular book. And down south, actually, again, I go into a bookshop and I think, how's anybody ever going to notice me with all these books? And it almost puts me off. There's just books and books and books. And you see ones that look the same as other books. You're almost seeing the same book over and over again. So I tend to go into charity shops, definitely, and
I do
pick
that
up
as well.
books there. And second-hand bookshops I absolutely love.
Yeah, I have
I
to show you
suppose
the one in Stirling.
if I go to a genre, it tends to be classics or history, usually real history rather than novels set in history, historical biographies and diaries. My lockdown challenge to myself was reading the diaries of Samuel Pepys because of the plague year.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if I'm going to read them at all, I'm going to read the full version, only I didn't realise that read to 10 volumes. So
quite a challenge, though.
I've got to the beginning of April in the final 10th volume.
Wow.
So I will be pleased to have finished them, and they've been really, really interesting. But it's that sort of thing. And again, online it tends to be a specific book, so that's where I'm getting my rumour Gondons from.
Yeah.
But I think as I get older, I get fussier. I do read crime books for review purposes.
Yeah.
But other than that, it tends to be only somebody that I know is a really good author, or, I think there are so many books that I want to read.
Yeah.
And sensibly speaking, I'm now 63, and most of the women in our family haven't made it to 80. My mum made it to 82. So I've probably got another 15 years of active life, assuming I don't get Alzheimer's, which is also a family curse.
Yeah.
So,
I know that.
if I'm going to read a book, it needs to be one that I really, really want to read.
Yes.
And I'm also getting, I used to finish every book that I started, and now the author has got 2 chapters to hook me, and I'm sorry if they've not done it by then. And it doesn't, if it's good writing, and I think I'm going to like this, I'll go along for the ride. But if it's supposed to be a straight thriller, if I am unthrilled, I'm afraid I keep a bag for the charity shop because I'm on duty there once a month.
Yeah.
So I just put the bag down by the door, and if I decide no, I'm not going to read that, in it goes.
Yeah.
Unless it's a review book, in which case I have to plough right through.
I mean, I grew up with Catherine Cookson. She was one of my very favourite writers. And do you know, I'm so surprised that hardly anyone knows her. I go and I talk to...
That's surprising. There's plenty of her in the charity shops.
Exactly.
I'd assumed that she cropped up. I thought she was still read.
No,
but then the Harry Potters, I don't know if children read those anymore.
No.
Maybe there's a
But
sort of time that people are fashionable.
The whole young adult thing is so exploded. And I mean, it's saturated now. That, you've got book boxes you can get once a month. And I know parents that pay the £35 a month for these book boxes because they get all this other stuff in there. And it's very fancy looking books. I'll give them that. The books are fantastic. But the kids, they get so wrapped up in these, it's got to be a new novel. And they don't want to read Narnia. They don't want to read the fairy tales. They don't want to sit and read Harry Potter. I mean, I was working in a school, and most of them could not tell me a classical children's novelist or novel title unless they were reading it in class. And I thought, that's scary to me. Absolutely terrifying. So
The
I
other
always make
thing
a
I would
point, you know,
sure.
like I make a point in saying Catherine Cookson's my inspiration. And when I don't get, like when I meet somebody that doesn't know who she is, I mean, she's a dame, you know, so she's well known, then I explain who she is. And I'm dyslexic, as everyone knows. And so when I read her writing, I understood she was writing as she would talk to somebody. And that made the books very real to me because it clicked with me. I write how I talk. And by the way, all my editors hate that, by the way, because they're like, seriously, Crystal, half the time we don't know what you're saying. Especially if I go for it, like I'm riding along and then I have a Shetland moment and I do something and it's all Shetland description and then I'm like, oh, sods. And now I got to go and explain this to this poor editor who's never heard of this at all. And, you know, I spent 2 weeks having to rewrite it. But to me, she's such an undercredited writer now. She was one of the favorite authors for the Queen. And people don't realize that. And she has written a lot of books. I mean, I'm lucky I've got 90% of her collection in my house. And I adore every single book. There is more to Catherine than Tilly Trotter. That's the one that everybody knows, is Tilly Trotter on the Moth. And, you know, she's incredible. She actually, when I was reading her interviews and stuff, she hinted at writers like Elizabeth Chatsworth. And I went and I read her and I was like, wow, this woman can write. It was, I mean, I'm not a fan of Viking books because I grew up with the Viking culture and it's very difficult for me. But I'll tell you something, she pulled off that Norse really well. And I was really surprised. And she sold me, with one book, she sold me on her whole series. And none of her books connect to each other, which I didn't realize at the time is all just, you know, a similar theme. And I bought them all because I was like, this is good writing. And it's very difficult to get just really good writing nowadays. Do you find that when you pick up some of these newer books and you think, wow, you know, this is just not doing it for me?
Yes. I think the quality of the writing is the thing that I tend to notice most. I will stick with something if it's well written.
Yeah.
I think also the books that I review, some of them are self-published.
I see.
And they've not been properly edited.
Yeah.
Sometimes authors don't understand that you have to spend on getting a professional editor.
Yeah, you do.
And it's just you just have to, you know. It's like if you were exhibiting paintings, you wouldn't stick on any old frame that you'd got from a charity shop. You'd frame it properly if you were expecting it to sell.
And it's a business.
And with a book,
that's what people don't realize. It's a business. You know, you have to invest money in your business to make money. And particularly with authors, that's very important. You've got to also do your homework on who you're publishing with. I mean, that's something else I find. Like, there is publishers who do these part pay contracts, and it's not worth it. It really is not worth it. Trust me. And that terrifies me. Nowadays, like, I'm doing a BA honors course, and they do not teach you about the publishing industry at all. They teach you how to write. They teach you all about grammar. They teach you all about, you know, looking and reflecting on work and everything like that. But they don't actually teach you about the publishing industry. And you have to kind of learn as you go. I mean, I was self-published. Yeah. I was severely dyslexic when I self-published. And it was awful. I binned it. I was so embarrassed. I binned it. And I went on and I have published with people all over the world. And if they don't have a decent editor, I have to leave. Because if I don't have someone that I can really, really work with to make sure that book's perfect, what's the point of me putting it out? And I think I've said that a lot. And when I did my book tour, my book was perfect, but I did a book tour, and it just was not well organized at all. I mean, I'm turning up, and the book's turning up 5 minutes after me, you know, and they hadn't marketed it, so none of the stores knew how to promote that I was coming in to do it. And I did a tour from London to Aberdeen, and I did probably 90% of that promotion myself. And every shop I went to, I mean, it was only maybe 2 or 3 books in a shop, and I sold out because I knew, I mean, Shetlanders know how to sell. We have to know how to sell stuff.
Mm.
I mean, I think everyone's had to sell stuff at Sunday markets and stuff. And that's the great thing about us. We can do that. And I was so disillusioned by that. You know, I was really disillusioned by that publisher. And it took me a long time to find my feet again. And now I'm actually, rather than write 2 or 3 books in one go, I take longer to write a book. I take much longer to write a book because I want to make sure it's perfect. I mean, my crime novel, I've been working on it for 4 or 5 years now. And I worked with, I'm so lucky, I got in touch with a guy that did 48 Hours in the US. Incredible gentleman. And that poor detective must have sat and read things 150 times. And the book's not finished. But he has spent so much time going through police procedures, looking at case files. You know, he dug out his old case files just to help me. You know, I was really, really lucky. And when that book does get published, I know it'll be the best book possible. Have I said it in Shetland? Yes, I have. Is it probably a very brutal murder? Yeah. But I actually, you know, when I was in Shetland, I did my research. I drove the road. Well, my dad drove because I can't drive. But my dad did time things for me. So it's actually possible for things to happen. Which not a lot of people actually understand. But I knew if I was going to do a book and every Shetlander was going to read it, it had to be spot on. Because in Shetland, you can't get away with it not being spot on because they tell you. And I'm sure Anne Cleese had a lot of people come up to her at signings and say, you do realise that what you suggested is not possible? As a lot of the noveling stuff I did say that.
It's also important that I believe it as I'm writing it. So, exactly. As you say, I do drive from place to place and check how long it's going to take. Or, in Cass's case, sail from place to place and check how long it's going to take, which is far more fun. And exactly. The book that was set on Fetlar, Death on a Shetland Isle, then I sort of got the book more or less roughed out in my mind, and so that I knew the place we had to go. And then my husband and I had a lovely day out, just driving around Fetlar and actually going into places like Broch Lodge, past the large notice that said "Keep out, this means you," and into up to the folly and along to the beach where the person was found and all that sort of thing. And it makes it real.
Yeah.
And especially Shetland changes so much at different times of year that I take care when I know when the week or week and a half that the book is going to be set in, then I spend every day with a notebook just writing down the way the sky changes, the colours, the light, exactly. The flowers that are flowering, what birds you hear, all that, because winter is completely different from summer, and spring and autumn from each other, and, you know, May and June are different, all the little subtle differences. And I think that makes my book real.
And I find that too. Like, when I was doing the Marie's World series, people don't realise that I spent a lot of time researching that. I mean, I'm a retired dancer. Anyone in Shetland knows I used to teach dance classes. And I had quite a few students, so I knew how difficult it was to do street hip-hop when you're not supported. And I did it in the youth clubs. So not only was I sitting my standard grade exams, but I was teaching a full dance class 2-3 times a week. And it was hard work. But I took that research of doing that and putting it into the Marie's World series. So, like, I know if your knee's sore, you can't do certain moves, okay? If you fall through something, you can't do. And it was great because I sat with, like, people don't realize, I sat with John Haswell for a number of years, picking his brain. He used to actually hate my conversations in the end because I asked way too many questions for his liking. And I studied under Izzy.
As well, then.
Yeah. And
my best pal, Izzy.
Yep. And I studied under Izzy Swanson. She got me at age 8 for youth drama club. And she held on to me right till I left, right till I moved away. Because she realized I had a talent for taking something and running with it. So there was a couple of times but there was one time she came to me and she said, our lead just quit. Now this is like the day before opening night. And I was like, oh crap. That's a lot of lines to learn in a really short space of time. But she knew that I could do it because if I had that talent. So I took a lot of that entertainment stuff, a lot of the wrestling stuff that I had personally experienced by being around wrestlers, and they are really difficult people to get on with sometimes. And I wrote the books, and I worked, bless my co-author, Joe, he lives in Germany. I think I spent weeks and weeks and hours on the phone with him getting things perfect. And I didn't just bug him. I went and bugged 15 other wrestlers. So it was like the best researched book I could put out. And I did set some of it in Aberdeen because that's where I spent a lot of my life, which people don't realize because I was a sick kid. So sick kids don't stay in Shetland. They go to Aberdeen for treatment. And it was great because I was able to put a lot of the stuff, like I knew the nightclub scene in Aberdeen. I knew where everything happened. And there was so many people that came to me and said, wow, your book's really realistic. And that meant more to me than anything, to hear that. And I mean, it's not a book that's in print at the moment, and I hope that, I republish it at some point. But it gave me that inspiration to know, hey, this could be something. Because I've put the work and the effort into it. And I think if your writer really believes in something, then that comes through. You can't fake that. I know a lot of writers try and fake it, and it doesn't work. But with everything I do, because I knew of you when I was at school, because funnily enough, we crossed paths once, and you rubbed off on me. And I was under Annie. And Annie was an incredible learning support assistant for the Anderson High School. And she taught me so much about just going with what I knew and loved. She was probably nurturing that creative writing side of me way before anybody realized I had any talent. And she was the driving force for me to do the writing contest at the library. And I met Debbie Glory. Next thing I knew, I had a writing career. She told me, she says, you've got one hell of a detailed mind. Why aren't you publishing? And I couldn't answer that question to her. And now, and she's followed my career since I took off. And that's the biggest honor to me, was to be able to say to her, hey, I've published a book, I've done a book tour, I've walked into a bookstore and seen my book on the shelf. Might not have been spotlighted, but that was the best moment of my life, was to do that. I never quite got the moment, though, of walking into the Shetland book shop and seeing my book on the shelf. That was my dream.
You will.
But I will eventually, especially if I set a book in Shetland. Then they might include me.
I'm sure they will.
And you were the inspiration for me to do this crime novel. Because I was reading your stuff, and we were messaging back on back and forth on Facebook, and I loved your work. I loved the fact I couldn't tell, what was going to happen. I read a lot of Kelly Armstrong recently. She did a thriller series called Omens. And I can tell you, I don't believe at all it was a thriller. It was like a book that was trying to do so many genres at once. It was like you couldn't put your finger on what it was supposed to be. And I couldn't, for the life of me, I was like, is this a fantasy? Is this a thriller? Is this a murder mystery? It just didn't tick one box more than any of the others. It was a really good read. I just wish she had, stuck to one thing. It was too much in one go.
When I really thought about it, I decided that what I'm probably writing, actually, and I know they come under the heading of puzzle mysteries, but what I'm probably writing is children's action stories for grown-ups.
Well, yeah.
I think that's what Kat thinks she's in.
I mean, I liked yours because it wasn't I hate a lot of the crime novels that you get, and it's all about sex. To me, I can't do it. It totally ruins the mood for me. I have to skip over it. There's honestly a beautiful crime writer called Marie Force. She's absolutely fantastic. I just wish there wasn't any sex in her books. And I've said that to her. I said, I love your stuff. I just don't like the sex. And that woman can create a thriller. and they're short,
Mm-hmm.
and they're actually with a company that's under Mills and Boon, and people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
But she's an incredible writer, and I tried her just simply because a publicity person reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've got this book. Can you review it?" And I fell in love with it. It was the same. I don't know if you've come across Fiona Cummings. She
No.
has an incredible gift for crime and thriller. She wrote a story called Bones, and it's about a serial killer that is desperately looking for bones that have been deformed, children with deformed bones and skeletons with deformed bones, and it's crazy. You just get, and he works in a hospital, and you know that he's, you follow this female detective, and she's amazing. But you're creeped out the whole time because it slides into his brain a lot. And you think, can somebody honestly think like this? Like, you get chills reading it. And to me, that just being given that book to review has set me on a course to read her constantly. If I'm really feeling down and I feel like I'm not a very good writer and I want to throw it in, I go and I pick up her, or I pick up Rachel Kane, or I pick up a Catherine Cookson, or even yours, and I get re-inspired, relit, and it means so much more to me than I actually realized. And I think that's the good thing about books is that you no matter what you're going through, there's a book to get you through it. I think, unless you're like me, who gets stuck reading a really big book in hospital and is awful, and then you're like, I wish I was doing anything else but reading this book. But I can't do anything else, so I'm just going to have to read it. Yeah.
Well, I almost had a disaster because I started lockdown in hospital. I turned myself in with, I'd had problems with bowel cancer and an infection and so on.
Yeah.
And I was due for a big operation just before lockdown started. And I suddenly woke up with this great swelling where the infection was.
Yeah.
So instead of going into Mass, which is what we planned to do, it was the first Mass of Lent, the last Friday of the last Friday of February, and so I said to my husband, I think I probably better go to A&E.
Yeah.
So we went to A&E, and I was lucky because the consultant on duty was actually a bowel specialist from Glasgow, so I could explain to her what the problem was, which was so complicated that she understood what I was saying. She knew my surgeon.
Yes, exactly.
She said to the nurse who was checking me in, take this one in right now and tell Chris in Aberdeen to put her down as an emergency.
Exactly.
And so I was in the Gilbert-Bain Hospital in Shetland for. They were vaguely speaking about this disease in China somewhere, and then they sent me down an ambulance flight, and Philip came with me to stay at Clan, which is this wonderful hostel for cancer patients and their families.
Yeah,
and so his plan was to stay until I had the op. And I was there for a month.
Yeah.
And so while Philip was still allowed to visit me, then he came in, and the plan was that he would go to the Oxfam bookshop in Aberdeen, and I'd given him a list of people I would be happy to read any time, like Dick Francis, Georgette Hare and Jane Austen. He was just going to buy me a couple of books each day. And that was the first shop to close, almost.
Yeah.
So luckily I had my Kindle with the complete works of Jane Austen, and I think probably half the works of Dick Francis. And, so I spent my time in Aberdeen getting better and reading Jane Austen, which was lovely.
That's an amazing way to do it. I had 2 long stays during lockdown. I was in January, the whole of January I was in there. And I was lucky. I had a good Rachel Kane book with me. And bless her, she's actually passed on. Now, that is one I was going to recommend to you to actually try, is The Bitter Falls. It is such a good thriller, and this poor woman goes through so much. You root from her from the get-go, because you think, what the hell could happen to why did this happen to just one person? And she's got 2 kids
because
as
the
well.
author had it in there. And every time things looked like they were getting... I mean, this is what I do with Cass. If her life is going too quietly, I think, what would she least like to happen to her next and make it happen.
Exactly.
And then say, get out of that one now, Cass.
And you know, the funny thing, I was watching a TV series on Amazon because I have to have something while I'm cross-stitching. Otherwise I fall asleep. I don't know what it is, but it quietens my brain enough I sleep. I've been watching Quantico. And it's a really good thriller. It's funny. But the problem is I'm on season 2. They've gone through this Quantico thing, and they were FBI agents. They made it out and everything. And then in season 2, she's now in, you know, the next one up, the spy, you know, department. And I'm like, but this isn't Quantico anymore. This has nothing to do with Quantico. And then, you know, it's like the same, almost the same idea of season 1 is replaying in season 2. And I'm thinking, but you got rid of the characters I liked in season 2. Like, no. And I find that with some of the books as well. Like, I loved Rachel because she would sometimes kill the characters I liked the best. And I would throw the book and I'd be like, "Arr!" But it was because she knew it was the one thing that we wouldn't want to happen. And you would turn the page, desperate to think that this character had gotten out of this story. And that's what I love about books. I need that, oh my God, I can't put this down. Because if I don't have that, I don't know why I'm reading it. I mean, I struggled for the first time in my life. I struggled with Leslie Pierce, who's a famous period drama writer. And I would get lost in a lot of her description. But then I realized it was because I was dyslexic and it was going to take me a while to get to the level of reading that I needed to be to understand her. And I read Gypsy in January. I flew through Gypsy. And I think I remember texting my hubby. My husband came every 2 days to the hospital to get me clean clothes. Because in Glasgow, you don't get your clothes washed. So you have to have fresh clothes.
Well, you don't in Aberdeen either.
No.
That was another thing that went by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, do you know it would be so helpful if you're not from that place, if you're particularly an islander, where you're not got a sort of lineage of clean clothes that they could at least, you know, wash them for you? Because, you know, no offense, you're changing twice a day in the hospital because things happen and you have to. So bless him, he came in every couple of days with clothes, and I ended up texting him saying, I need another book. I've read my book. And he's like, but you bring in 2 books, Crystal. And I'm like, but I can't read the other one. So I ordered the entire Catherine Cookson collection for my birthday, as you do. And he was getting all these parcels coming in through the door. And he goes, do you want a Catherine? And honestly, I was so glad to have Catherine Cookson that. Because I had drains in my neck, so I could not do anything at all. And it was, you know, I couldn't even eat. You know, the one thing everybody loves to do is eat. And I literally couldn't do that either. So it was nice to have that escape and that kind of moment. I did. And I discovered a couple authors this year that I didn't know of who I really have enjoyed, and they're YA novelists. You know, it's weird to think that I've gotten to that stage of my life where I can almost pick up anything and I can judge whether I'm liking it or not. And I have gotten into the habit of, I now send my books that I don't like down to my mother-in-law, who then distributes it around her friends. And if none of them like them, then they go to the charity shop. Because I believe in recycling novels. I hate this idea that, I mean, I literally found out that somebody burnt their books when they were done with them. And I'm like, why would you do that? And he's like, well, I need a way to fill my fire. Like, but people can enjoy that. Like, I was so offended that he would burn a book. It took me a long time to get over that one. But there is people out there that just waste it, you know, and don't burn the books. I mean, Rachel Kane did a whole series on why you don't burn the books. I'll have to recommend that one to you, actually. It's the library. It's called the Library Series. And it's when libraries run the world.
Yes.
Doesn't that not sound really awesome? I loved it, just from the opening. And there's a lot. She's very into physics. She was actually worked at a nuclear plant. So physics comes into it quite a bit. And I never thought I would actually like that. But apparently I do. I was able to get into it. But no, like, I thought of you when I was reading it, the first book I read this year of that series. I actually sat and thought of you. Like, I thought if anyone would enjoy a story like that about a library who has all the knowledge of the world and is holding it hostage, you would appreciate that. But I think that's something that as authors we have, like, we'll read something, and if we know people, we pass it on. Like, we're terrible for that. We're gossips. We're like, have you read this?
Yes.
You know? That's a positive thing about this, I think. Okay, so we're going to go on to writing. Now, I have so many questions that I struggled to come up with just the few that I sent you. So we're going to start off with, how did you go about creating the darker characters that you create in your storylines? Was that on the boat, or was that from conversations, coffee shop, watching stuff?
It tends to be when I'm creating characters, then I have a rough idea of. I'm not a very meticulous plotter, because I find that takes away the writing fun.
Yeah.
But I have a rough idea of what sort of, or what I want the person to do in the story, if I can put it like that.
Yeah.
And then I have to think to myself, what sort of person would do this? Is it something in their childhood that would make them, is it something about the way they grow up? Or is it something that they really want? I think it's almost an acting job. The characters aren't dark to themselves.
No, they're just dark to us.
I don't know how many people think they are actually bad people. They think they're perfectly reasonable people and the rest of the world is being awkward.
Yeah.
So what I have to do is almost think myself into the mindset where what I want them to do, or what they have to do in the book, is absolutely normal, and try and think of, as I'm writing about them, think of somebody who is to them behaving perfectly normally.
Yeah, like it's a logical explanation. I mean, when I did my...
that's a logical way to behave, they think.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even the most horrible of my villains, I don't want to give spoilers, but in the one which set on the Swan, what was it called? The Shetland Sea Murders.
Yes.
That I think were my two nastiest villains, but to them their behaviour was perfectly logical. They were supplying a commodity.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, for me, when I started writing my murder mystery, I was inspired by something that happened in the States. And it was, I have a lot of friends in the States, and I think that's what people don't realize, is because, I traveled to LA. I spent time in LA. And this murder was so awful to me. I couldn't put it in my mind as, why would somebody do this? And that became the context of my book, because I wanted to see what, taking it from a rational perspective and a logical perspective, I had to say, well, why would somebody actually do this? And when I found out the real reason the murder had been committed, I was more shocked, because my answer was much more logical than what the actual motive was. And I thought, you need to think like that, particularly when you're doing darker characters. Like when I wrote Harold, I mean, Harold was based on one of my close friends, Raven. And he has this almost darker side to him because of how he grew up. And I was able to kind of tap into his logic and his way of thinking to create Harold, but in a bigger sense than what he actually is in person.
Yes, you take little bits of yourself and swell it out to fill the whole character.
Because I think even when you're acting, you have to believe that you're that character. So every time I do dialogue, I have to almost step into the skin of my characters. And I can tell you, from when I did it with the crime novel, I felt I always had to have a shower after that character. And I still do. Even editing, I still feel like I have to go for a wash afterwards. But that's, to me, how you create not a dark character, but a villain that's people can understand why they've done it, and it's not too outrageous.
Yes.
I like the fact that we have a similar viewpoint on that. There's so many people that have totally different ways of doing it. So what inspired you to do a series on the sailboat? I think I know the answer to this one, but I know that people will want to know this. And also Do you write at all on the sailboat when you're sailing, or is it a case of your hands are too full and you have to just?
My hands are too full and my head is too full. And in theory, you'd think I could go out there and think out brilliant plots, but I can't because I'm busy sailing. But yes, I absolutely love sailing. We spent those magical summers in the West Highlands messing about in boats.
Yeah.
And then I tried sailing on a school trip and I just thought, this is it, you
Yes.
know? Um, and so I used my gap year wages to buy a sailing dinghy. I still have her, a 12.5 footer.
Yeah.
And then nearly 20 years ago now I bought my yacht Karima. So if you imagine her as a small caravan with a pointy end and sails,
Yes.
she's that kind of size. She's really, really neatly fitted out. And yesterday I spent getting my mast ready to go up, so I will be sailing again soon. And I thought for a heroine, a live-aboard sailor would be interesting
It's different.
because
Yeah.
if you're a single-handed sailor, you need to be. It's back to this Shetland self-reliance again, isn't it?
Yes.
If I'm out there in the middle of the boat and something goes wrong, either I fix it or I don't come home.
Yes.
Or if I'm out just round the corner and the wind blows up on me, you know. So you have to be, and Cass is a much better sailor than I am and has gone much further
Yes.
and knows an awful lot more. But, I thought that would be an interesting person, somebody who is used to taking charge. And in the first book, Death on a Longship, that is her first command. And I'm afraid we sailors do get a bit like, it actually says in the sailing directions, you are the master under God. He is the next step up
Yeah.
when you are in charge of the
And
ship.
there's a lot of times you call on him because the seas.
And in some
Nightmare
ways
City.
that's important because somebody has to see the whole ship.
Yeah.
Somebody has to look and have a plan and know what's going on and then give instructions to other people who don't have that vision. You can't have 3 people captaining a ship. So I thought that would make an interesting detective heroine as well. But the other thing that I quite liked is that she's an outsider to the land world. She doesn't get the idea that you should go into a bathroom, in a public toilet somewhere, and there's a tap labelled hot, and above it there has to be a notice saying warning hot water. She's gone, what?
Yeah.
Are people
I
on land
when I moved to the
really, really
mainland,
stupid?
I got stuck on that a lot because there was no signs
Yeah.
when I grew up in Shetland about hot water. I was like,
No,
what the hell is
no.
this?
No, I mean, it says hot on it.
I know.
How stupid do you have to be not to know that it might be hot? So that also on sea, there are no rules except getting yourself home in one piece.
Yeah.
And so you tend to work by common sense.
And that's
And
not
so,
something that's available a lot
yeah.
nowadays.
And that doesn't always work with land laws, where there are fiddling funny rules that there is no obvious sense for. So I thought that would be a fun detective heroine. And then, of course, there are the sort of ongoing relationship between her and her police officer, Gavin, who is a land person. He's her opposite. He loves the hills, he loves the land, he loves working with, sheep and cows and all that sort of thing. His
Totally
brother has a
alien to
farm.
her, yeah.
And yes, so it's opposites attract. But on the other hand, they're both very similar in that they like silence, they like peace, they like solitude.
They like the quiet
And
lives
I
that
think
we
it
all
could
dream
work.
about. Yeah.
But I think they would have an expensive lifestyle. If they want to settle down and be good Catholic parents with 6 little Catholic children that sit in the pew in sort of diminishing order of height, and which is what Cass's dad would like, of course, being a dyed-in-the-wool Irish Catholic, and definitely not before matrimony either. There will be a shotgun pointed at Cass, I think, if ever a baby comes along.
Oh,
But,
I think there would be a World War III if there's a baby that comes along for cats.
Well, I think half of her would absolutely love it, but she has to understand that she has to give up the sea.
I don't think she
Because-
could, though. I don't think she's.
Well, that's what I'm not sure about either. I really genuinely don't know whether if Gavin wants a family, and he does, whether he's going to have to go and find somebody else.
Exactly.
or whether she's going to have to accept that to have the kind of lifestyle they want, her sailing her sailing world will not provide the money to keep one
Exactly.
person at home.
And
His
I also
will.
think, like, when we look at it as Shetlanders, we all had to give up sailing at some point, whether it was for health, whether it's for family, and you end
Mm,
up missing the sea. It's like this
mm,
itch that you can't scratch.
mm.
And I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I couldn't go out in once my grandfather passed, I couldn't go out in a fishing boat anymore because his boat was gone.
Mm,
We had to sell his boat
mm,
because of his Alzheimer's.
mm.
And
Yeah.
I missed it a lot. Like, my husband will
Mm-hmm.
tell you that any opportunity I get to go on a boat or a plane, I
Yes.
take it in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
probably the only person
I,
he's ever met that can sleep most of the way to LA, but yet nobody else is sleeping in the plane because I snore too loudly. You know? In fact, it was that bad. The cabin crew came and asked me if I'd wake up just for a while so that everybody else could sleep, and I'm like, wait, am I really that bad? To the point where my husband, when we finally got to LA, he had to sleep because he hadn't slept the entire journey there, and it was like 16 hours we traveled. And then, of course, we had an earthquake. He'd been in bed less than an hour, and there was an earthquake. And he looked at me in a very Glaswegian way of saying this. He said, "I'm not getting up. I'm going back to sleep. This is a big earthquake, and he's sleeping through it. You know." So I can understand Cass's dilemma. Like, the idea of me, because like a lot of writers have to give up writing for a period of time when you have children, because it's very hard to write if you've got a 3-year-old running around your feet. You know, it's extremely difficult, and you've got to keep an eye on these kids nowadays. They don't learn from things like sticking their fingers in the electrical sockets, or why you don't
they
pull a
learn.
cat's tail, for instance.
The way I dealt with that, because I was a single parent for a lot of my my
Yeah.
daughter's childhood, and I got up an hour earlier because Marnie is not a getter-upper. She is at her best after midday.
Oh, that's
And
handy.
so I just got up at 5:30 so that I had an hour to write before I hit my school day.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Um,
and that was the only way I managed to do it.
I mean, when I was working at the school, I got up at 6 a.m. because my mum needed the fire on every morning. And I knew I could put the fire on, make a cup of coffee, and I would get at least an hour of writing, or at least an hour to do, I don't know if it's as bad for you, but emails. Oh my lord, emails. They take like most of the day sometimes. And I just sat in that hour. I would either write or I'd do emails. And then I'd go to school, finish at 3, come out, and then it would be 2 hours I would write. And sometimes I'd fall asleep in that hour because kids wear you out. And I would just write. But yeah, it's a fear of mine to be a new mommy and have to write. I think my novel will have to be finished before I give birth, once I get to that point. But yeah, I want to be able to say to my kids, hey, you know what? Mom was a writer when you guys were little, and Mama was publishing. And, that stack over there is all Mom's books, But to me, that's a legacy I can leave the kids, and they can tell their grandkids, hey, your granny was an author, and she kept it going, and she did podcasts, and she really broke out of the traditional roles, and that's why I like you, because I look up at you, and you've got that amazing writing career, where you're with a mainstream publisher, you're with an amazing agent. I've had a couple of conversations with her. She's fantastic. You'll have to let her know I said that, actually. But yeah, it's like, I want to lead the charge forward almost for women, because I know a lot of women, when they have kids, they think, oh, well, that's it, I don't think that should be the case, Maybe that's just me.
I don't know if people do still think that, and whether Marnie is following my example, but because I was a single parent, I had to work, and so I was a teacher, and that fitted nicely with her school holidays, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That was my second choice of career. The first one was a writer, but now she's got 2 children and she's still an actor.
Well, there you go.
And a busy one. You see her. Now let me see. Does the commercial where the wee boy steals a cake for his sister, Mr. Kipling one. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay, well, she's the mother in that
All
one.
right. Yeah, I mean,
You recognise
I think
her
it's
from that
incredible
because
that
it's been done recently.
I think she's learned from you. And I think that's the thing. Like, my mom worked when she had me. I was sick a lot. So there was a lot of times she couldn't work. And it was just me and her. But she had a drive that really rubbed off on me. And it wasn't just from her. Like, it was like a woman thing in my family. Like, my grandmother was driven. On both sides they were driven. And then my great-grandmother, right up till I was 11, you know, she's in a care home and she's still knitting and she's driven. And my nan was the same right up till she passed. She was knitting away like crazy. In fact, they put all the squares together and made one last blanket because that's all she could knit at the end was squares. And that to me,
I think it's a Scottish thing.
Yeah.
I think it's accepted. You know, it's kind of a miners and a fisherman thing that the woman is at home and the man is away at sea, and he may not be home for 3 or 4 days, and somebody has to keep the household running, and the somebody is us.
Yeah, and the thing
I'm
is,
sure.
like, my father used to say, I am the wildest and freest spirit. He's like, you can't just do the whole stay-at-home mom thing. You know, you can't even just have a job, Chris. Like, you take it to the next stage where you have to be the best person at my work. And when I was working with the kids, I did that. I was one of the best support teachers that they could have because I listened to the kids. I played with the kids. I mean, I'd go out in the playground, as nuts as it sounds.
Yeah.
And I'd be, you know, I would be playing catchy, and there was a hug catchy we had for nursery because the kids were really scared of this whole COVID thing. And we were trying to figure out ways to help them, and I came up with hug catchy, and it worked. These kids that were terrified, who were who were seeing the news and stuff, it changed the game. And then when I came down here and I worked with severely autistic children, I was surprised at how well I actually did with them, because it was almost like I could understand them from, I've been in special needs, I've lived it, and now I know how to treat them like I would have wanted to be treated. Like, I treated them as if they were normal people who just needed somebody to sit next to them in class, because kids are annoying. I'm sorry. There's always one child in the classroom that you want to just strangle because they don't shut up, or they tease the other kids, or they throw things, you know, and I didn't mind doing that. I was so sad when I had to give it up because, you know, health is something that people don't always they do take for granted. And I think you and me understand that we don't get infinite amount of health these days. Things do go wrong, and you just have to be able to adapt and adjust with it.
Yes. And it's something that I do take good health for granted a bit, but I had many years of ME, and that, you know, every morning I'd wake up feeling like I had a particularly bad hangover, morning after morning after morning. Yeah. And so exhausted. At one point I was actually teaching from a sitting down position because it was too tiring to stand.
Yeah.
And having got over that, you know, made me appreciate every day I wake up feeling well. I want to just get out there and enjoy the day, and, you know, take the boat out or get out in the garden, or even just go for a walk. And so yeah, it's lovely to have my bounce back after so long of messing about health-wise.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, like, I'm still in that bounce back stage where I went through probably the worst 2 years of my life with my health. And I used to always bounce back like a bouncy ball, so I would be down for like a couple weeks, then I'd be back like 110% better than what I was. And this time it was like I hit the floor, and it was like somebody had to peel me with a spatula to get me off it. You know, it took me so long to climb back, and I still am climbing back. I have days where I get so lost in a book, I'll look up and be like, oh crap, I forgot to eat lunch, or whatever. And to me, like, I have to almost stop myself now and really be regulated in saying, okay, meal times are important, the book can wait, I will pick up it again.
I mean, you don't want it to.
No, you don't want it to, and people don't understand that. It's like you get lost in the characters. I actually have to put meals into my books to remind me to
Yes.
go eat. You know, it sounds like such a crazy thing, and people don't realize
Mhm.
that I'm doing it for that reason. Like, I will have a deliciously described meal so that I go eat something. You know,
Yes.
it's almost like a, you know, permission to go and have dinner or permission to go eat lunch. But yeah,
Mhm.
I understand that sometimes I have to write in hospital, and I don't know if you've experienced that writing in hospital, but
Mhm.
it's very different because you've got somebody annoying you every 15 minutes for something, and you're
Mhm.
like, I
Mhm.
just want to write. So I ended up writing at night because I had 3 weeks. I didn't sleep for 3 weeks in the hospital.
Mhm.
It was like the hardest 3 weeks, and all I did was
Even the
write.
middle of the night, you don't get peace.
Yeah, you never get peace. And I wrote for 3 weeks, and I finished a book that was over 100,000 words.
Mhm.
It probably makes no sense, and I've got it with an editor right now, and I've not heard from her in a while, so I'm starting to wonder if
Mhm.
she's maybe too dug in.
Everything. Uh,
But yeah,
I did have to go in. I had 2 weeks. My psoriasis suddenly flared up really badly,
yeah,
and I went over to the doctor. She tried me with one cream, but that was just before Christmas. So by the time I realised it didn't work, it was after Christmas. So she tried me with another one. Of course, that was over New Year, and by the time New Year was over, my skin was red raw and horribly painful.
yeah,
And so I went over to see the doctor, and she looked at it and said, "I think we'll have you in Aberdeen today. Go
yep,
home and pack a bag." I
yeah,
didn't realise that apparently psoriasis can turn into septicemia. So I
yes,
spent a whole fortnight wrapped, slathered in coal tar and wrapped in bandages like something from the Return of the Mummy. But it was a sort of it was part of the old bit of the hospital, sort of 6 flights up,
yes,
and I spent my entire day on my own except for somebody passing me in a tray of food.
yeah,
And that I used to transcribe the diaries of my intrepid Aunt Isabel that I'd been sort of working over, and I had a whole fortnight which I just spent solidly in 1917 on the Russian front driving ambulances in my head.
yeah,
Um, so, yeah, it's a good time to get peace and quiet and your meals made for you,
yeah,
but
and
I don't recommend it.
I
It's
don't
like it's a
recommend
good
it
way.
either. Yeah. I mean,
But
that's crazy because we both had, you know, septicemia
yeah.
scares. I actually had sepsis, but I was lucky. My
Mhm.
body walled it off. It was like,
Yeah. No, I didn't actually get septicemia, but she was worried that it was going to turn to that.
yeah,
It was most
yeah.
horrible.
I mean, I got it in Shetland. I actually developed mine in Shetland, and it got
Mm-hmm.
missed by Aberdeen because they had never seen it before, so they didn't know what it
Mm-hmm.
was. And it wasn't until I
Mm-hmm.
was back in Glasgow and they scanned me and they were like, "Oh my God, she's," and it was like almost as if everything became rushed. I was ordered
Mm-hmm.
into the hospital that night. I was
Yes.
told the joints were coming out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it was done so quickly that it was almost like I had to blink and it was all kind of taken care of.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a writer, I think, I don't know if this is the same for you, but I have control issues. So if I don't have a say in something, I don't particularly go well with it, you know? Um, and I really did find that where I was like, okay, right. Can I have a say in this now? And I didn't get a say in it,
Okay.
but it was good. Um,
I think controlling tendencies are more teacher tendencies than writer tendencies.
oh, well,
But
then I've
I
definitely
think
got the teacher tendencies.
that I think as far as hospital is concerned, I now understand that hospitals are no place for sick people.
No.
That the doctors are far too busy thinking about 10 of you to be able to focus on one of you.
Oh, I
And
agree
if
with
you
that.
want to get well and you want to get out of there, you need to question everything they say,
Yes.
think about everything they want to do, make sure they explain everything properly. And I'm afraid I am now the patient from hell, but that
So
is
am
through
I.
experience.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
I'm,
I-
they call
my
it
husband probably
micromanaging.
described it.
You know, I got this
Mm,
whole big speech on don't micromanage your doctors. I'm sorry, you missed sepsis. I don't have that level of trust at the moment for you. I said you got to earn it back. Like, I mean,
mm,
you know, I had a surgeon. He was such a rush to get me operated on. They made mistakes. But I got my joints replaced before he left. However, he didn't have time to hand me over to the new surgeon, so that was awkward. And it was at a different hospital, so that was awkward. And for me, like, particularly, I feel for my husband, because he's got to drive me to, like, 8 different hospitals sometimes. Because all these specialists, they don't work out of one place.
No. They're absolute. I know they have one big computer that they should all be looking up at, but the number of times I've had to try and chase up letter from consultant which hasn't been received by the GP, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or more like letter from the consultant which has been filed by the GP and nobody tells me about it.
Oh, you feel like the secretary.
Yeah. Tested, I am phoning the doctor's surgery to say, have those results come in yet? Well.
I understand that. I do really understand that, because I have doctors in different districts, and it is a one system thing. But Aberdeen wouldn't talk to Glasgow, and Glasgow wouldn't talk to Aberdeen, and Edinburgh wouldn't talk to Glasgow, and Glasgow wouldn't talk to Edinburgh. It was such a fight every day to get things organised that I almost wanted to pull my hair out. It's a full-time job. Like, if I've got it, my condition is now classified as idiopathic rheumatoid arthritis, which means it comes from juvenile. It means that it evolves and it changes every 5 years. I have to re-explain that to some of these doctors. Like, if I go see somebody about dermatology, for instance, because that's how I got sepsis, was actually from my skin. I have to explain it. Or if I go and I see a pain specialist, because that's the new thing. If you've got a long-term disease now, you've got to see a pain specialist. Then you almost have to explain, well, this is the reason that I'm not just going to jump and do everything you say, and this is why I'm asking 50,000 questions, because I've been through the worst mill you could possibly imagine, and I've survived, and I really don't want to go back there. And it was the same, like, I was so anal with this COVID stuff, because, I mean, I didn't want to end up in ICU again. Like, my husband probably went mad, because I'm like, no, hands, mask, test. Like, you know, if he got a cold, he got tested. It was the only way I could protect myself. I think it's ridiculous now that the government's only solution for people with high risk factors is to give us a badge. Like, what's a 2-meter badge going to do in the real world? It doesn't make sense to me, you know? But this is the world that we live in, where things just don't make sense, you know?
Yes, a lot of the time.
So when you write your novels, you've talked about the way that you've put it together and things. Do you get it as a jigsaw puzzle, or is it more like a film for you?
I think once the ideas are flowing and I'm writing full speed, then I do see it as a movie, or more like something I'm acting in.
Yeah.
And occasionally I've up and been surprised that I'm in my writing room and not halfway down the Vol with Cass.
Yeah.
But it's also the plot is a jigsaw puzzle. I have all these pieces that I think, yeah, that belongs here and that belongs there, and my desk ends up covered with little notes saying, remember so and so does such and such.
Yeah.
And as I'm writing also, I print it out so far, so that if I have a good idea, then I can flip back and write in the margin, tell such and such here, or interview so and so here, so that when I go and redraft, then I've got all these ideas, they're written down so I don't lose them. Because you know what ideas which are not written down go like? They just disappear.
They disappear, yeah. I'm the same. I have a breakdown of every chapter, and then I have notes.
Oh no, I tried that the first time.
Yeah.
The first 3 books maybe, I really meticulously plotted beforehand.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't as much fun to write.
Yeah.
I usually know who the murderer is, but occasionally at the end I suddenly think, oh, that would be a more surprising murder. And change. I
think it changes from book to book. I think for me, I get movie most of the time, but then I get books that are jigsaw puzzles where I've broken down the book maybe 4 or 5 years ago, or I lose the notebook that has the book written down in it, And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got to put these pieces together from my memory. And it becomes
That's
something
better.
completely different.
The things that you remember are the key points. That's what the
Exactly.
reader's going to remember.
Yeah.
Well, so
And
I think that
sometimes it's good that you lose the notebook because it means you get a completely better or different story than what you would have had if you'd kept the notebook. Because I've recently had that happen to me. I'm actually jigsawing a book back together because the notebook has vanished somewhere, and I can't find it anywhere, and I had the whole book broke down in it. So I always think it's interesting to ask writers because people forget we're human and we don't always have the easiest time in putting these things together. So this is a double barrel question now for you. Which characters stayed with you the longest? And is there a character that you wish you could have written more about?
Well, I have got very fond of my Cass. That's 10 books now. She's been in nearly 11.
It's a good series.
I don't identify with her. People quite often say, "Are you Cass?" And I say, "No." She's like a rather wayward little sister who will not take good advice and won't listen to me, her big sister.
Which
But
is every
I
character
enjoy.
we ever write, yes.
Yeah, I enjoy writing about her, and my husband always says I'm bullshit when I'm really immersed in Cass's head.
Yeah.
A character I'd like to write more about. I invented a whole Norse family I wrote a half-length book called Footsteps in the Dew for publishing at Shetland Noir, and it's a half-length crime novel set in Shetland in Norse times.
Wow.
And the main character is Ranveig, who was the oldest sister, and her mother had died 7 or 8 years ago at the birth of her youngest brother. And she had this sort of lively bunch of siblings, and I had an awful lot of fun with them and taking myself back. It was set in Unst, in the dig up above Lund.
Yeah.
And I would like to write another half-length crime novel about them and then publish the two together as one book.
I think that would be amazing. I think that could be
it would be
fantastic
nice
book.
to get time to do it, of course.
Yeah,
But if I can get this class off, then maybe I'll have time over the summer. But the problem is the summer is the time to go out for a nice sail, if at all possible.
And I mean, I find it hard to write if the sun's shining because I'll say to husband, "Can you drive me somewhere? Can you take me down to the beach? Can we go somewhere in the car?" Because unfortunately, I don't drive, so the only way I can get anywhere is if hubby's driving. I think for me, like, I do take a notebook when I'm in the car, and sometimes I do take the computer with me, and I'll write because I write better when I'm in the sun than I do when I'm in winter. And when I was in LA, because the sun rose at 5 in the morning, and it was such a warm place to be, I actually felt more better than I'd ever felt in my life because my condition was under control. And I wrote so much in that 2 week, it was like 7 days or something, but I wrote a lot. Like, we'd come back, my husband, was not great in the sun. He would fall asleep, and I would be sitting on the bed. I couldn't handle his temperature gauge for the room, so I'd be bundled under blankets, which I had promised the Mexican woman I'd give back, and I was writing, and, I completely adapted to the LA lifestyle so quickly, and I miss it. Like, I would love to go back and spend a bit more time there and spend more time with the people, the actual locals, not the celebrities that I know or the wrestlers I know or the actors I know, but actual locals. I mean, I walked through the Grove, and it was such a different feel to walking through Riverside, and I got to see quite a bit of LA in that regard, but they are people that don't walk anywhere. And I had to get used to the fact there's no streetlights. There's not a single streetlight unless a business has put it up.
That in Shetland. I do wish they had that in Shetland.
Yeah.
We don't need streetlights.
No, we don't need them in Shetland, but they do need them in LA, or being on the motorway and you can't see your exit. They need lights on the motorway so you can see where your exit is. That would be helpful, But I did find that uniqueness of Shetland had reached LA. That's something people don't know. There's actually streets in LA that's named after Shetland places.
Oh, good.
How crazy is that? We have reached the land of immortality and stars, and we have areas of that place is named after us. Like, there was an Unst. I found a street called Yell. I found a street called Shetland. And my husband goes, only you would find a street in America named after where you come from. I swear there's Shetlanders in LA. So if you're a Shetlander in LA, I want to hear from you. Because I know we got everywhere, you know. So I find that the best. Honestly, it tickled me so much when I saw that. So we've talked a lot about editing, writing, and life. So now it's more about your hobbies. What hobbies do you take up, and what would you want to explore if you had more time?
Well, one of my big hobbies, which I do for an hour a day, is playing the flute.
Yes.
And I started 4 years ago, so I'm not very good, and I will never get very good. But I'd always wanted to learn, and then one of Shetland's flute teachers, Neil Morris, you know?
Oh, yeah, Neil. Yes.
His wife was my head teacher for a bit, and then I said they were leaving Shetland. I said, but I want to learn to play.
Yes.
Because I was thinking,
yeah.
And he said, well, now or never. So it took me about 3 weeks to get even a squeak out of the flute. If you've ever picked up a flute and tried to get a note from it.
Yes, Neil made me try several times, yes.
Bells, I think, by the time he left. And now I'm working on Beethoven. He passed me on to another teacher. But I do love that. I practice for an hour a day straight after lunch. And there's a chorus of sparrows in the garden. And they sort of appear. There's up to 100 of them.
Yeah.
And they appear and they sit down in the flowering currant bush just outside the window where I play. And you see them sort of choosing the best seats and arguing over who gets first look at the programme and whether they've brought the sweeties with them.
Yes.
And then they just sit and cheep along. And there might be not one anywhere. And then suddenly they appear. I think I mentioned dressmaking, costumes for theatre.
Yes.
And I've played almost everything in panto. I haven't played the Dame, but 2 months ago, I finally got to be Cinderella. I'd been, because I'm tall, I'd been the principal boy, I'd been the sidekick, I'd been broker's man, I'd been the evil woman, which was great fun. Witches are always best.
Yes, of course.
So finally, in Roald Dahl, I got to play Cinderella.
Wow.
Roald Dahl's Cinderella, not quite the same.
Well, it's still Cinderella. I mean, I used to get all the small roles too, because I'm only 5'1". So Izzy used to.
Yes, you'd get the princess.
Oh no, I never got the princess. No, I always got the evil ones, because I could do evil really well.
Yes.
And I got King Rat a couple of times. I was in the panto, the Pied Piper, and I had to direct the rats. That was my job, because I could fit in the hole. That was the only reason I got that role, was I could fit through the hole that they had cut, and they hadn't cut the hole big enough for the original person that was playing it. And my first debut on stage was the King Rat running around Garrison Theatre, squeaking my head off and jumping in a hole.
I probably saw you.
Oh yeah, and I had bruises on my knees for weeks, but it was worth it. And Izzy had me play Selkies and all sorts after that, but I never got to do one of the big pantos, and it was one of my regrets in Shetland. I really wanted to do one of the bigger pantos, but I can't sing. So I think that's maybe what it is. I'm terrible. I'm an awful singer. So I think John had said to Izzy, "Yeah, don't cast Crystal as a singer." So yeah, but bless him, John put me in a lot of great roles. So
maybe you were a really good character part, because the King Rat needs to be sold.
And I sold it. Yeah. I mean, my mother, she actually thought there was a rat in the Garrison Theatre. She'd jump out of her seat, because she'd never heard me do it before. And there was quite a few people that were like, what the hell? You know, because I just have a natural squeaky voice anyway. So Izzy was like, yeah, no brainer. But yeah, she hung on to me after that. And I did a lot of stuff that was fun. For me, I go into the hobbies of cross-stitch and stuff like that, because I can decompress my mind that way. So is there, like, what else do you do to clear your mind? If, like, you've had a really tough day editing or a really tough day writing, what is it that you do to, like, silence your brain at night?
Well, I like watching films. My husband and I do Wednesday evening and Saturday evening in front of a movie.
Which is good. It's
Collapse
perfect. Yeah.
Collapse into a nice hot bath was a good book.
Oh, I
If
do
it's been
that.
a really bad
Yeah,
day,
yeah. I love
or
that.
go and play my flute, or read. But I mean, my favourite is taking the boat out. And in summer, I still do 2 hours at my desk every day.
Yeah.
So I do till 9 till 11, and then have a cup of tea with Philip, and then after that I consider the day as my own, unless I have to do anything or writing, in which case I have to claw it back another day.
Yeah, and I think that is very similar for me as well, because I'll get up early and then I usually have hospital appointments. So like in studying too, like I took on a BA honors program, and if you know anything about being dyslexic, it is extremely hard to do it because you don't have a scribe and you don't have the support system if you're doing it remotely, and I had no clue what I was taking on when I did this. I'm in my year 2, and I mean it's been a battle. I'm only just now getting a dyslexic assessment because I never had one in Shetland. They never assessed me in Shetland. So I'm about to go through that. But it seems to be a family tradition. All my family members were dyslexic.
Yes, it goes through the families.
Yeah.
It does.
And I pray that my daughter and my son it isn't, because my husband is so smart. I'm just hoping his genes knock out my bad ones, and we get the best of both worlds.
People are smart too, and that's one of the ways that you spot them. Somebody who is very smart verbally and has difficulty with writing.
And that was
and
me.
Sometimes
that was me. I could tell you a fantastic story, and that's why they gave me a scribe for every class. It does not help in maths. I have to say, a scribe did not help me in math at all. And still to this day, I cannot do mathematics to save my life. But I learned a lot about myself from having a scribe. I think I would have probably come out of the education system with nothing if I hadn't had a scribe. Because I couldn't write anyway, but the arthritis was destroying my hands at the time. And it's only now in the last sort of 4 years that I'm able to physically write, but I can't physically write in a notepad for very long before the pain gets too much. So I've learned my limits, and I really think the scribe helped me on that. So I feel very lucky. So this is another hard question. I know you're going to hate this, but where is
Dragon Dictate? Have you tried programs like Dragon Dictate?
I did, and you know, it's only been the last few years that my Shetland accent has thinned, so it's not as thick as it used to be. But I talk too fast for Dragon Dictate. Particularly if I'm writing, my thoughts just come as a rush. It's a bit like a waterfall. And to try and get that out through my mouth while writing, I just couldn't do it. And also, because you're having to tell Dragon Dictate full stop, new paragraph, it throws you completely out of your rhythm, and I really struggled with it. And I said to my hubby was watching me fight with it, and it was the accent that was the 90% of the problem, because if I was to say Bonnie, it comes out very Shetland, but I can't say it in a Scottish way, and I can't say it in an American way that makes it sense to the computer. So I really felt like I had my hands tied with that. So I type, and I do, if I have to spell a word and I am not getting it, then I will say it, and the Dragon, I use the dictation at that point. But most of it is handheld writing, unless I'm reading it. If I've written it out and I'm reading it, I can read it into the computer, and it's easier. And actually, that slows me down, especially if I'm editing. I'll get the computer to read it to me, because I find it very difficult to read off a computer screen, and that has helped me a lot more. So I've learned tricks and stuff as I go along, but I wish I'd known this when I was in high school, kind of thing. So what's your favorite place to curl up during the day? Like a garden, cafe, reader's nook, sofa?
Well, I still need a 2-hour rest in the afternoon, 4 to 6, and I go to bed with 3 cats. Yes. I do have a wooden deck chair for the garden, but it's usually too windy in Shetland to read easily.
No, you're
and the
fighting the book.
The boat is very comfy. We have a lovely sunny conservatory with a chaise longue. But my favourite reading seat ever, back at our childhood cottage, and I wish I could repeat that, was an old Victorian hip bath with a cushion in the bottom.
Oh,
That I remember as being the most blissfully comfortable place to read. Though
I
it's
found
only fair
that
to say
too.
that my sister said she never could. I wish I could find another old Victorian hip bath.
I was lucky because in
Somebody
the
somewhere must have
hotel
them.
we had for the
Mm,
wedding, it had an iron brass claw tub,
mm,
and it was so
mm,
supportive of your back and your neck. I read 60 pages in one go, which is unknown
yeah.
for me because I have to take
Mm,
things slowly when I'm dyslexic, and I was addicted to the tub. I wanted to take the tub home with me because it was the best bath I'd ever laid in. And I picked
yeah.
that room out of all the rooms in the hotel I could have had for the wedding. I picked that room because of the tub, and it had great window seats for reading too. So I actually,
Mm,
prior to going to sleep that night, I was sitting reading an awful classical novel, Othello,
mm,
in the window seat of the hotel.
mm,
And I was watching these birds of prey that they have at the hotel flying around at night.
mm.
And I was reading,
Oh,
and it was a very
wonderful.
spooky read, but it was great. And that,
Mm,
that to me has been my
mm,
favorite two reading spots I've had. I've not got a favorite reading nook in this house yet, but yeah, I
mm,
usually have to read in bedtime or in the bath because that's the only time I get to
mm,
read. But yeah, so far at the moment, the car is my place to go. If I
mm.
really want to spend a time reading, I'll say, "Hey, Ian, can you take me out?" But I'm actually reading Ursula, which is a science fiction novel for my BA honors course, which
Mhm,
has totally thrown me because it's like politics but in space.
mm,
So it's not a genre that I would have ever read if it wasn't for the course.
mhm,
And so far, I'm 20 pages in, and I think I know what's going on. But when it
mhm.
gets to the mathematics point, I think that's when I will lose the plot entirely because I'll have no clue what they're talking about. But it's good. So we're wrapping up with the word game, and I know
Mm.
I sent you the words before we started because I knew
Yep.
that you would. Everybody struggles with this game. I've had people
Mhm.
ask me, "Can I just give you one word that comes to my mind first?" So if you can't tie it to a book, feel free to just give me a word in response, because that seems to be easier for some people. I don't know why, but so the first word is sheep.
Okay. I had difficulty with this one, but I came up with The Little White Horse by
Oh,
Elizabeth Goudge, which I absolutely loved as a child. And the boy in that story, Robin, was a shepherd.
I like that. See, I came up with Thomas Harding, so
Mhm.
um, waves.
Waves was a book called Gathering Wind, and it's a story of the loss of the replica Bounty. And I read that the ship that was made for the Mel Gibson movie, The
Oh, right,
Bounty,
yeah,
they
yeah.
made a replica, and this that continued as a sort of taking passengers ship. And I came across the story of how she was lost in a storm because two of the folk on board the Surlanda had actually been on board
Yeah.
in that. Um,
Oh.
so that's waves, huge waves,
And then I've got
gathering wind.
ravens. Now I got this one from it was a young adult thing, and I loved it because it was an entire series about the Raven Boys. So that's where I got my one
Mhm.
from.
Well, mine was Raven Call Me Brother by Gavin Maxwell.
Oh,
You know, he wrote the stories about the otters, Ring of
yeah,
Bright Water.
yeah.
Well, Raven Call Me Brother was the last one of those.
Oh, wow. And then I came up with crows because my house outside
Yeah,
is full of
Crow.
crows at the
Yeah,
moment.
happy with this one. But I thought of one of my favourite golden age crime writers is Patricia Wentworth,
Yeah,
and she wrote one book called The Case of William Smith, in which this man who'd lost his memory in the war came back, and he carved animals, and one of them was a
ah.
key craw crow, and it
Oh,
was through
that's
seeing the
clever.
animals that the people that knew him recognised him.
Yeah, that one was clever. And then we've got
Mm.
powdered sugar, which to me is
This was
how
a
the
difficult
snow
one.
falls in
I had
Shetlands.
a definite idea of a book set in the 18th century with somebody breaking down a sugar loaf, because sugar loaves used to be
Yeah.
sort of tall, pointed things. But I went for Ellis Peters' The Virgin in the Ice,
Oh, that one's
um,
nice.
which is the one that's set in a deep, deep winter with snow everywhere. So that's why
Yeah.
powder
I
sugar.
mean, I tried to keep it in a Shetlandy kind of theme when I did the
Mm-hmm.
word game. So We've got pity dancers. Now, for those that are listening and are
Salt
not
air.
Shetlanders, that's Northern
Mm,
Lights, which is green lights that
mm,
dance across the sky at night.
mm.
I can't think of a better way to
For that
explain
one,
that.
I thought the snowman. I was trying to think of a book which had them in, but I thought of the snowman.
Yeah, I never thought of that
You know,
one
the
actually.
Christmas one. There's a lovely scene where they fly over the Northern Lights.
Yeah,
And you didn't mention Saltaire. That was there.
yes,
Hornblower. I'm reading through the Hornblower series. Plenty of
yes.
Saltaire in there.
Saltair, yes. I didn't realize I jumped one actually, so that's a good catch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on today with us, and
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
yeah, it's been a good session, and I think the readers have learned a lot about us, and we're really demything the whole author mysterious lifestyle, because that was the whole point of this series.
Yeah.
We are human beings outside of our books. We have lives.
Oh, absolutely, definitely.
We're not trolls in a cave or those people that are secretly watching you in the cafes writing on their computers, because I've met a lot of those. But we are actually humans, and that's the kind of the whole point of this. And it's an empowerment series too, because we're empowering women and we're empowering writers and people with disabilities. You know, we're saying, hey guys, it's possible to have your dreams too. So I want to thank Marzi for being on, and I will see you guys all next week.